All right, let's get started. Happy Lunar New Year, everybody. Welcome to the White House. We're very excited to have this briefing on AAPI women's issues, and we have convened some of the most prominent folks here at the White House and across this administration who are working on this issue every single day from day one to really provide solutions and the resources that we need for our AAPI sisters. And so we're very delighted to have you all here today. I also recognize the power and the importance of Nat Hoff, who is the preeminent AAPI women's organization across this country. We want to salute your leadership for all the work that you are doing. I know on a personal level, the woman in my life who has really impacted and made me the person I am today. My mom came here when she was 25 years old to this country. Very little resource, very little access to the English language, and somehow by kind of the power that she has inside her, she was able to raise 2 children. Turned out pretty well, I think. And she's also somehow managed to learn the language, go to college, then go get her master's, then go on to get her PhD, and now is a tenured professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, teaching computer science. And I don't have to look further than that to see the resilience of our community, of our AAPI sisters, and the work, the potential that we have. But also, she reminds me of the fact that our work is not yet done. We have so much more that we need to do at the administration level, also at the grassroots level, and that's why we welcome you from all across this country to be, and around the world, to be with us here today. And so I'm not going to take too much time because I know some of our speakers has to go pretty soon. So let me just mention that this briefing is a chance for us to listen to you all about the concerns and the problems that you're facing on the grassroots level, but also a time for us to update you about what we're doing here at the White House and across the administration on this very important issue. So our first speaker, or the office that we've invited to speak with us today, is the White House Council on Women and Girls, who have been working tirelessly to provide the resources that we need. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Ara Siegel, who is going to talk a little bit about the work that she's been doing in her office.
Thanks, Eddie.
Sure.
Hello, everyone. It is nice to see you. It's always great to have women. It's always a comforting feeling. I love you, Eddie. So I'll just touch briefly on the role of the council, what we focus on, and then I know we'll have time for discussion, and then I can answer any questions more in depth about specific initiatives. And I know Raquel is going to be after me and has to run out because everyone here has back-to-back meetings always. And so I want to give her time to speak briefly as well. So for those of you who don't know, the Council of Women and Girls was created under President Obama as one of the first things he did when he came into office in March of 2009. The idea being that we need to find a way to integrate issues that affect women and girls into all of the decisions around policy and programming the federal government makes. So the way that it is set up is there is a representative from each White House office and every federal agency that sits on the council, so the Internal Government Council, and that person holds responsibility within their department or agency to oversee issues affecting women and girls and making sure that we're always taking into consideration the specific needs of women and girls and also pushing the envelope where it needs to be pushed. So that model has worked really well because it's really reached into agencies where you didn't even think there was a need, whether it's but then once you start thinking about it, you realize how big the need is, whether it's the Department of Transportation or the Export-Import Bank. We've really reached into the depths of government to figure out how to integrate these issues. Valerie Jarrett is the chair of the council, and she is also a senior advisor to the president, as many of you know, and oversees the offices of public engagement and intergovernmental affairs. And Tina Chen, who many of you may also know, is the executive director, and she's also the First Lady's Chief of Staff. She was at the Office of Public Engagement first and moved on to be the First Lady's Chief of Staff, but retained her work with the council because it's so close to her heart. We really oversee a number of different issues. As I said, I think this can reach across any issue you can find an angle. But I would say our work focuses on a few different buckets. Economic security, looking at how we make sure that women and families are getting the support they need to lead healthy lives. That can include things like equal pay for equal work, workplace flexibility, and looking at the way the workplace is and what kind of changes it needs to encounter in order to support the population of the workforce now, which is nearly 50% women, and most women are attracting and retaining women to science, technology, engineering, and math fields, getting girls into those fields to make sure we can keep women in those fields. We look at domestic violence. The Vice President and the President appointed the first ever advisor on domestic violence, Lynn Rosenthal, in the Vice President's office. Her entire job is focusing on how we can eradicate domestic violence. Small businesses, women-owned small businesses, the special needs that they encounter, whether it's accessing capital, expanding markets, growing their businesses. We know there are specific things that women-owned business owners or women-owned businesses face that other businesses may not. And also looking at international issues. The APAC Women Economy Summit was our big initiative this year, and happy to speak more about that later. But looking at international and what role we play there, and healthcare, which Raquel will speak a little bit more about, but making sure that the needs of women are accounted for in all of our healthcare decisions and programming. So there's a lot in there, which is why I will not speak too much more, and happy to answer questions about specific initiatives and go into depth more. But I want to turn it over to Raquel now.
Great, thanks, Alvaro. As Alvaro alluded to, I will apologize in advance. I have to run out right after I speak, so I have a 2 o'clock with my boss. But I wanted to at least come by and talk a little bit about the Affordable Care Act and some of the work we've been doing in the reproductive health space as well. And Alvaro is one of my trusted sidekicks in all those issues, so she can answer any questions after I leave. But as many of you know, the President fought for and passed historic legislation in the Affordable Care Act. This is not just a victory for all Americans, but specifically there are a lot of divisions and policies within the Affordable Care Act that are beneficial, extremely beneficial to women specifically. A couple of things to note, and some of you may know a lot of these facts, but when we were passing healthcare, the healthcare law, there were a lot of problems that we were looking at and trying to address. One that always struck out to me so let me just kind of back up. I worked on the Hill prior to coming to the White House and worked on healthcare reform. So worked for Senator Tom Carper of Delaware on healthcare when we were passing it in Congress. And one of the facts that always struck out to me is that under the current system, a healthy 22-year-old girl could be charged 100% more than her 22-year-old male counterpart in healthcare. There were just those kind of facts and those kind of stories were just rampant throughout our healthcare system. And so the need for passing healthcare was something that was very important to this president and very important for America as a whole. Some just real quick benefits in the healthcare law. One that has been widely popular and has already been implemented is for children under 26 to stay on their parents' plan. I don't know about a lot of you, but I, after graduating college at 21, I went to law school and didn't graduate law school until I was 24, 25. Of course, I did not have a job at that time, and so the idea of being able to stay on my mother's plan would have been extremely beneficial, right? Because I don't have a job and therefore wasn't getting health insurance through my employer. And as a lot of you know, the individual market in the current shape is not necessarily the most affordable market for healthcare, which we will be fixing come 2014, making it affordable for every American. So that's one of the benefits that has been implemented that has been extremely successful and extremely popular. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I talked about the 22-year-old healthy woman and how she can be charged 100% more than her male counterpart. Is one of the things that the healthcare law does, the Affordable Care Act does, is that no longer will women be denied coverage just because of their because they're female or because of a pregnancy. A pre-existing condition can no longer cause you to have increased health insurance premium just because you got pregnant or had another pre-existing condition, whatever that may be. And so those are all very important benefits. The last benefit I do want to mention, and kind of ties into an announcement we had on Friday, more in the reproductive health space, is around preventive health services. We all recognize the importance of preventive health care and that it is a keystone in creating a healthy America. As part of that, we felt in the Affordable Care Act that preventive health services should be free to us as consumers of health care. And there should be no out-of-pocket costs, no co-pays for preventive health services. In that vein, one of the things that we were looking at is what would constitute as a preventive health service. And for women, the Institute of Medicine recently put out a list of services that constitute preventive health services for women, and therefore will be covered at no additional cost to women in healthcare come August 1, 2012. Well, let me rephrase that, for any new plan after August 1, 2012. And most healthcare plans, for the most part, start on January, the beginning of the year. So for the majority of us, come the beginning of January 1st, 2013, we'll have no cost benefits, or no out-of-pocket cost for those preventive health services. Some of those services that were listed were domestic violence screening, HIV screening, screening for gestational diabetes, HPV DNA testing for women over age 30, well woman visits, breastfeeding support, supplies, and counseling. And another, as many of you know, was around contraception and having access to contraceptive services and counseling that are FDA approved. As part of that, when that IOM report was released, we had to make a determination of, what was going to constitute those contraceptive services, and if there was going to be any kind of exemption for religious employers. One of the things that the president has been very vocal on and very committed to is making sure that we have access for women health services, but recognizing also religious freedoms and the religious rights of certain employers. And so in August of last year, we put out a rule that basically would require all employers to provide contraceptive services to women at no additional cost as a preventive health service, but had an exemption for what we call religious employers, which are basically churches and church associations, as employers would not have to cover contraceptive services at no cost. There was a lot of discussion, and we had a lot of feedback and comments from both the women's community as well as the faith community. And just on Friday, Secretary Sebelius of the Health and Human Services Department announced that we were going to maintain that exemption, because the dynamic was, are we going to broaden the exemption, or we're going to keep it the same, or we're going to narrow it, what we were going to do around that exemption. We heard from the various stakeholders and communities, and the decision that was made was that we were going to maintain the exemption for churches and church associations, and provide a one-year transitional relief for other religiously affiliated organizations. So we're not going to expand that exemption. I think that from our perspective, it's really important that women have access to these services, that these services are important in reducing unintended pregnancies and for the health of women. So there is not an expansion of the exemption, but this one-year transitional relief that was well received from the women's community, and I think was a great success for women's access to these important services. With that, I'll stop. And again, Avra, and I know Hal just walked in, will taking my place, work with me very closely on these issues so they can be able to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks.
Sure. Absolutely.
So just to follow up, I also want to bring a little bit of attention to our Strong Council on Women and Girls team. So I'm the deputy director. Sarah is the senior advisor and focuses on girls programming and girls policy. And Hallie Schneier is the director for outreach. So she I know that some of you have been in touch with her, and she just came from another meeting. Like I said, we're back to back all the time. Hallie, we even have a name tag for you. You can sit right here. Look at how prepared Annie is.
Went all out. Also, I think Felicia's also in the competition, so we have a spot for her.
Okay.
So we have folks coming in and out of this room. So.
And then I also want to introduce Lizzie Shen, who's our new intern with us over there. So thanks, Lizzie. And Lizzie, did you happen to print out those fact sheets? Great. So we can pass around at the end our fact sheet on accomplishments for women and girls, which will also give you an idea. So we can even pass those out now, just so that you can look over them, so if you have any questions on any specific issues. So I just want to take a chance with that. Thanks.
So would you like to talk a little bit?
Sure.
Well, as Avra said, I'm senior advisor on the Council on Women and Girls, and I focus on girls programming. And I just started this new role as part of my other role in the White House, which is speechwriting. I started this a few weeks ago, And so far, I've identified a few areas of focus which are based largely on disparities that I've identified between boys and girls. The first one is one you've probably heard a fair amount about, which is STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. There are certainly disparities between boys and girls. This is an issue we've actually been focusing on at the White House quite a bit for the past few years. The second issue is actually one that we don't talk a lot about, and that's getting girls engaged in what are referred to often as non-traditional occupations. These are fields that are actually growing quite a bit in the next 10 years, things like transportation, construction, technician head jobs that are growing. These are reasonably high-paying occupations. They're occupations that have very, very few women in them, which is unfortunate because these are actually great sources of jobs for, good jobs for women, and they oftentimes don't require a four-year college degree. So we're looking into how we encourage more girls to get engaged in these kinds of professions. The third issue that I'm looking at quite a bit is physical activity in girls. This is actually something I've worked a lot with the First Lady on her Let's Move initiative, and I actually didn't know this, believe it or not. Girls are significantly less likely to be physically active than boys, which is a pretty serious public health problem. It's a physical health problem, it's a mental health problem, it's a confidence problem. It's pretty serious, so we're kind of looking into how we can encourage more girls to be active. And the final issue, which is one that I've not even begun to wrap my mind around, is mental health. This is a pretty complicated one, but girls are much more likely to suffer from depression than boys. And I've literally just sort of found this out. I'm just starting to look into this, but that one is very complicated. It kind of has a whole array of factors that lead into it. But those are the areas that I'm focusing on so far, and I would love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, and stories, suggestions. So thanks for all for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know that the White House Council on Women and Girls will be sticking around for the rest of this program to answer questions as we go into that part of the session. Well, I think the next speaker that I'd like to invite to speak about her office is Felicia Escobar, who has been a senior advisor in the Domestic Policy Council, has been an advocate on immigration. She's a huge champion for this community. And so we're very actually honored to have her despite her very busy schedule. So with that, I'll turn it over to Felicia.
Thanks, Eddie. Thank you all for being here. Looks like we're in the packed house, and hopefully there'll be a lot of great discussion. Again, my name is Felicia Escobar. I work in the Domestic Policy Council with my colleague Raquel, who spoke a minute ago about health issues. I focus on immigration policy and immigration reform issues. The president is deeply committed to fixing our broken immigration system. We've been talking about this issue with members on the Hill for the past several years. Unfortunately, we can't get the bipartisan consensus that we used to have on this issue back when I worked on it in 2006 and 2007 in the Senate. And we became very close to passing an immigration reform bill in those years, but unfortunately fell short. So what we've been focused on both continuing to build the momentum for legislative reform, and that means reaching out to all different types of communities that are impacted by our broken system, whether they're AAPI, Latino families who are impacted both by the broken family-based immigration system, or people who could be impacted by the DREAM Act, are impacted by the lack of a legalization program for the number of undocumented immigrants within the country, or business, high-tech firms who are interested in ensuring that they can bring additional talent to our country when we don't have U.S. workers that can meet some of their needs, to continue to work on securing our borders and enforcing our laws. So there's every week we talk to different groups, we talk to different leaders in the faith community, in the labor community, you name it, to try to continue to build the momentum for reform. In December of 2010, we did a lot of work around the DREAM Act. That came just 5 votes short of passing the Senate and getting to the president's desk for signature. There were a lot of people that were disappointed by that. But from our perspective, it showed to us that we came only one vote short of getting it here, and that was the first time that the House had taken up the DREAM Act and voted out of the chamber. I think that was really about people telling the story of DREAM Act students and really getting it on the minds of the American public and Congress. So that was really, from our perspective, a helpful moment, and we want to get to that point on the bigger piece of reform. But in the meantime, we know that we're living with a broken system, and we have to do whatever we can right now to make it work and be as functional as possible. So there are a lot of different things that agencies across the government, federal government, are working on, from the Department of Labor, that's very focused on worker protection issues. Secretary Solis is very interested in these issues. She's interested in protecting all workers regardless of their immigration status, which is something that the President is very committed to as well. And so we've made changes to some of the existing worker programs that are in place right now to make sure that that workers who are coming in through legal worker programs are getting protected and know their rights and are on an even playing field, as with U.S. workers and aren't being exploited. And we have a large wage and hour division within the Department of Labor that has increased over several hundred investigators that are actually going out to communities and investigating on their problems when people aren't getting paid the wages that they earn, things like that. OSHA is also within the Department of Labor doing a lot to protect the health and safety of workers. The Department of Justice is clearly involved in this issue as well from a civil rights perspective, and has been involved in several states challenging state laws that have been passed that we believe step over the line in terms of what states should be doing in terms of immigration enforcement. But obviously, we know the Department of Homeland Security is the big agency that's main task is to secure our borders and to administer and enforce our immigration laws. So there's a number of things that they're doing all over the department to improve the legal system and enforce the law. Two things I would just highlight for now. One is the work that they've been doing to focus our enforcement priorities in the interior, so that we are using the enforcement money that we get every year from Congress, and Congress every year, despite tight fiscal constraints, tends to increase the amount of money that the DHS gets to do enforcement. They're doing a couple things. They're issuing clear directives in terms of who their priorities are for removal. And so those are folks that have been convicted of crimes, people who have recently entered the country, people who have been deported and come back into the country, which under our laws, whether we like it or not, is a felony. Those are their priorities, and that's how they're trying to use their money and their enforcement resources, and so they're creating strategies to focus on those folks. At the same time, we know that there are people who get caught up in the system that aren't our priorities, people who've been in our country for a long time, have long-standing community ties, have family members, who maybe have served in the armed forces or are related to people who served in the armed forces, are victims of domestic violence and crimes. Those people are not our enforcement priorities. So recently, in the last several months, the Secretary and ICE Director, John Warden, have issued memorandum and policy and are training people on exercising prosecutorial discretion, which for law enforcement, every law enforcement official has the capacity and the ability to exercise discretion. They pick someone up, or if you're a prosecutor, you get a case that comes to on your desk, and you have to decide whether that is something that you should focus on, or if there's something else you should be spending your valuable time on. And so this prosecutorial discretion concept and the memos that have been issued on this really instruct ICE field agents, ICE attorneys around who are our priorities and who are not our priorities. And those folks that aren't our priorities are people who come to our country as young people who have long-standing ties, people who have family members, like as I mentioned, some of the folks I mentioned earlier, so victims of domestic violence and crime. So there's been a lot of work being done around that. The third piece of this is there are a bunch of cases that entered the immigration enforcement pipeline before we even got here, before we had enforcement priorities, and before we had a strong emphasis on exercising discretion. So the third thing that DHS is doing right now is reviewing all cases that are in the immigration backlog, about 300,000 that are pending in the immigration courts, and they're making decisions on whether those cases should be closed and terminated, or they should move forward based on our priorities, our enforcement priorities, and based on exercising discretion. So that is something that's ongoing right now. They have done 2 pilots in Denver and Baltimore related to the case-by-case review. They're also using the discretion memo to review every case now that comes in through the pipeline to decide whether they should move forward or not. There was a story in the New York Times late last week that talked about the fact that in Denver, where one of these pilots has just happened, the pilot ended January 13th. About 1 in 6 of the cases that were in the immigration courts in Denver are going to be closed. Some people want their cases to move forward because maybe they have access to asylum, or maybe they have other other benefits. So those cases may continue to move forward, but people will be given that option to determine if they want their case closed or they want to move forward and seek a larger benefit. The second big thing that we've been doing is more on the USCIS front. There's all kinds of things USCIS is doing to engage communities, but one recent announcement that they made was they're going to be changing some rules that they have related to family reunification and legal immigration. So, so that currently under the law, it's kind of complicated, but currently under the law, if you enter here illegally and you marry a U.S. citizen, or perhaps your parent is a U.S. citizen and they bring you illegally into the country, you can accrue something called unlawful presence, which has consequences in the future. If you want to get married, if you want to get a green card. One of the consequences it has is that if you want to get a green card and change your visa, you have to leave the country and get it processed outside the country. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this process. If you were here illegally for more than 180 days, you trigger something when you leave the country called the 3 and 10 year bars, which can make you ineligible to come back into the country for up to 10 years, depending on how long you're out of the country. So what it does is it creates a catch-22. People who are eligible for a green card because they've married a U.S. citizen or they're a child of a U.S. citizen isn't going to come forward, because if the only way they can actually access this green card and complete the process is if they leave the country, and then it's a coin toss about whether they'll get a waiver to the 3 and 10 year bars. So the change that we've made is, and that we're going to be doing through regulation, so it's a few months out, but the change we've announced that we're going to make is we're going to allow people to have that waiver to the 3 and 10 year bars processed inside the United States before they have to leave the country. We believe that this will help maybe tens of thousands of people, people who haven't started the legal immigration process because they're afraid to come out of the shadows and afraid of the consequences. And so we're very hopeful. USCIS is hoping to start processing applications by the end of this year, or by this year. There's a regulatory process that's underway, and in the next several weeks they will be they will be publishing the actual regulation in the Federal Register, the draft regulation, and at that point we're going to need a lot of people to submit comments, people who maybe understand and have experienced this issue from a community perspective, from a personal perspective, to help us understand how best to implement this. We're doing it this way because we want to preserve and make sure that this change outlasts this administration, and we also want to make sure we do it in the most effective way possible, so we need people's feedback on this process. But there are a number of other things that DHS has worked on to it. I know is going to speak about some of the work she did when she was at DHS around protecting workers and protecting women as well, immigrant combat women and others. But I'll turn it over to her and let her talk, and I'm sure people will have questions. I also, unfortunately, am going to have to leave in about 15 minutes, but I'm around for a little bit longer.
If I can also just mention that we're very lucky to have Felicia in our corner to really apply this immigration policy, and all, as you can tell, there's a lot going on with immigration, and to just have her thinking about how this affects not only the country but specifically to the API community. She's been a fierce champion of that, right? So Tuan and Mia, we've invited from the White House Initiative on APIs to come here to speak with us today. As you all know, in 2009, the President signed an executive order reestablishing this initiative to think about how we can address the various issues in our community. And I can say that it's the initiative that holds a lot of my mentors and a lot of our peer sisters, including the former executive director of NAPOF, Kiran Ahuja, who is our executive director and does a fantastic job. But with that, I want to turn it over to Mia and to Ed, who will talk a little bit more about what we're doing for women and girls and also our immigration.
Thanks, Eddie.
Sure.
Thank you all so much for being here. I feel like I'm among so many good friends. I thank you, Miriam, and everyone for organizing this amazing chapter leaders, briefing and everything else here this weekend. I really credit so much of my political consciousness, growth, and my community building in the Bay Area and in DC to NAPOF, because it's just such a wonderful network of API women. So thank you all so much for being here. I work in the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, like Eddie mentioned. And when the president reauthorized our initiative, he really did it so that the federal government could better understand the everyday needs of APIs. And that includes API women and girls. And so I'm going to, my wonderful colleagues, Tua, and her wonderful colleagues from OSHA are really going to go into going to really stick to broadly what we're doing around API Women, and that really focuses in on this memo that my former wonderful colleague Amanda Baran really put together in the last year. And so it's a partnership we're actually involved in with the White House Council on Women and Girls. And Amanda basically led 7 roundtables across the country where she really wanted to hone in on and listen to the needs, the specific needs of API women, because this is an opportunity to not only inform each other from a community side, but really to also listen and inform colleagues in the federal government and throughout the 25 different agencies and White House offices that we work in. And so there are some key themes that came out of those meetings. One of them, just to mention, Tina Chen, who's the executive director of the Council of Women and Girls, sat in San Francisco in August of last year at the API-DV Institute Summit. And major themes that came out of the roundtables, just to give you kind of a sense, are the lack of information on immigration adjustment programs like the Violence Against Women Act petitions and youth visas, asylum applications, the chilling impact of workplace raids on API women and families and immigrants, and the chilling impact of the collaboration between local law enforcement, federal, and state law enforcement agencies, and really the need to focus resources on reproductive health and mental health from a federal angle, and also ensuring that the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is culturally and linguistically appropriate. And so those are just some of the key themes that we've taken out, and this is actually perfect timing that we're meeting right now because we're still in the process of putting together this memo, and we would love to hear from you all what other major issues or themes we should be including, because this is a memo that's really going to circulate throughout the federal government, and it's going to advise our colleagues on how to adjust their programs to better meet the needs of API women and girls. So with that, I also want to mention, because my focus of the initiative is a lot on community engagement, we are looking for ways to engage with the community. We're doing live stream here. We're focusing on emerging and geographically isolated communities throughout the U.S. in the coming year, the Midwest and the southern states. And so we, Kieran and I are actually going to Memphis next month and going to Ohio this week. And so we're really open and willing and looking for opportunities to engage with all of you. So if you would like to, organize a roundtable, or have a meeting on Skype with Kieran, or these different kind of ways to engage, we're really wanting to dialogue and engage and encourage one another to be talking about this, and we're looking for your guidance and your advice and the work that we do. So thank you all so much. We're going to hand out a guide to federal agency resources at the end of this briefing, and but let me pass it on to Tuet to talk about our immigration record.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Tuet Byung, and I'm an advisor on immigration and civil rights at the White House Initiative. To those of you who are celebrating the Lunar New Year, Happy Lunar New Year in Vietnamese. This morning I spent the morning calling every single relative I had and having to wish them. And it was mostly the women that engineered all the calls, by the way. So usually we do the phone chain and stuff. So usually we're the ones who are critical to doing all the communications, which is I think how it functions in a lot of your families. But I'll keep my remarks really brief because I think we want to definitely hear from you all and field your questions, and I have colleagues from OSHA waiting too. But I came on from the Department of Homeland Security Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and there I worked on a range of issues related to immigrant detention. So I was in some of the internal deliberations around detention reforms, and also the focus on immigrant detainees who are women in detention as well. So I will definitely answer some questions to that. The main thing with ICE is that they released a covered services health package, which is much more inclusive about the type of services that they will provide for women who are in detention, which is a big win for ICE. But mainly, for you all, my background is an immigration attorney. I started my career serving women who and doing their T visas and VAWAs. So that's part of my profession.
initiative, our immigration work is really focused on latching on the great work and foundation that the Domestic Policy Council has put on integration issues, helping our communities become more integrated to the community, whether through economic supports, whether through labor and workforce training, whether through citizenship classes, working with philanthropy on how they can further bolster this integration work as well, and also hinges on the language access issues, which are still really, really critical to our community, and urging our federal agency partners to provide more meaningful access to federal programs and services. So those are kind of the priorities of our work in terms of human rights right now. And again, I look forward to your questions, and it's so great to be in the space with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we turn it over to you, we want to invite our last speakers to talk about the work of public labor and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So we have Debbie Berkowitz and Ken Atta. Debbie is the Chief of Staff for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. She joined that office in August of 2009. We're very excited to enlighten you today.
Hi, I think I'll give the presentation for OSHA and ask Ken questions. But first, I just want to tell you how honored I am to be here and how great it is to see all these young, wonderful, committed people. It's really very encouraging. So for those of you who don't know anything about OSHA, we're a small agency. We're in the Department of Labor. We have a gigantic mission. We're 1/8 the size of EPA, but we'd like to grow. And, you know, we have the fabulous Secretary of Labor, Hilda Solis, and one of her key initiatives that we've really carried out, and Ken has done a lot on the West Coast with this, is to protect vulnerable workers, which are largely immigrant workers, limited English proficiency workers in high-risk jobs who don't know their rights, who work in occupations that can compromise their health. And one of the great benefits of my job is I get to work with wonderful community organizations that have never, ever been in the Department of Labor before until this administration. And we work a lot with Miriam and with Chris down there and with you all from NAPOF. And I want to say that it's really been a collaboration, and that we've really worked very closely together on enforcement issues, on outreach issues, and I look forward to continuing. And the great thing is we've institutionalized this collaboration. So it's not just the political staff, it's the career staff that's really done a lot of it. I just want to give you an update on a couple of things that we've been working on, just to let you know. And Chris and your organization really brought this issue to us a year ago, and that is that we work on sort of health and safety issues among salon workers, hair salon and nail salon. And as you know, it's that industry is kind of, the makeup of it, it's very largely Asian American women and Asian immigrants. And one of the issues is there's a new product called Brazilian Blowout, which is a hair smoothing product, which makes your hair very smooth. I'm not used to it, but and one of the key ingredients in it happens to be formaldehyde, and the product was actually labeled formaldehyde free, and and that's how they marketed it. And immediately we started getting complaints from salons all over the country that they're having health effects. Formaldehyde is a carcinogen, it's an irritant, and you have a whole industry that is marketing it as formaldehyde free, using another name formaldehyde in the product. So I just want you to know that since you brought that to our attention, we have responded to an enormous amount of worker complaints. We have cited 23 different salons around the country for sometimes the levels of exposure from formaldehyde among women using the hair smoothing treatment is way higher than our OSHA standards allow. It's like you're in industrial facilities. And then we've also cited the manufacturers, and along with our state partners, we've cited 4 or 5 of the key manufacturers for essentially, not labeling their product correctly and not providing the necessary education training. When you work in a workplace, you have the right to know what you're working with, and whatever you're working with, whether it's cosmetics or whether you're in a factory, the company has to either label the product you're working with what's in it, and also send you a data sheet that sort of tells you what you can be exposed to so you can protect yourself. And of course, these companies did nothing about this. But the good thing is we are partnered with the FDA, we've partnered with the FTC, because some of you have been on the website of some of these organizations. They're incredibly bold. I think they're really ethically challenged here. They get on and they said, OSHA has approved this product, so, which we have not. So we understand that there's some negotiations going around all these issues, especially with Prop 65 in California that also got involved. We've lent all our resources. We have a lab in Utah that has processed sort of all the sort of toxicology issues here, and so we're hoping, to make some serious progress here. One of the great things is the industry has reached out to us, the beauty industry, and we just published an article that went in a magazine that went to 12,000 different salons, and now we're doing webinars with them. And so we think through the beauty and barber schools and all these other organizations, we're really getting the word out, and I think we're making a difference in these products, and that you just really can't market a product like this. But I also want to tell you that we've also really focused on the hazards facing nail salon workers. And one of the things is, and I'll pass these out, is we now have material in Vietnamese, we also have it in Chinese, and just thanks to you all. Because one of the key issues is people don't know their rights. And so we have some new web pages that I think I just sent to NAPOP on nail salon workers. We have one on hair salon workers. We're coming up with a new publication. So nail salon workers, that's sort of low literacy, so people and we'll translate it in different languages so people understand what the hazards are, what they can do, how to protect themselves. We also have engaged in some sort of outreach with our area offices, and I'm just lucky that Kanika, who's our regional director from California, is here, because we held 2 summits among the AAPI women's community, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, and it is on the West Coast. Organizations that had no idea what OSHA did or can help us, or, how can we be there? And so, I look forward to this continuing. And in addition, we have a grant program where that's often under attack, but so far it's still alive, where we provide funds to organizations to do training and education for workers on their rights under OSHA and their health and safety hazards, because we can't be everywhere. We're 1,000 inspectors for 7 million workplaces. And this year, we have 4 that are gone to different AAPI organizations around the country who are going to reach out on nail salon and hair salon issues. So we look forward to sort of continuing this work.
Thank you so much. So you've heard from us and the folks across this administration about the work that we're doing on these important issues. And now this is our chance to listen to you and hear your thoughts. And I know they're coming from all over the country. So we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts, and we convene sort of the more prominent champions in these issues. So we'd love to hear what your solutions are, what you're hearing on the ground, and how we can be a better advocate for what we do. So with that,
Thank you so much, Andy, for doing this. First, I want to acknowledge that we have 2 celebrations to do at this moment. Yesterday, of course, was the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, which established the very important right to women's reproductive autonomy. And we know that that is the basic and very fundamental cornerstone for women to have the full ability to choose whether and when to have children, and to have the ability to really reach reproductive justice, which is one of the 4 issues that I talked about. The second, of course, celebration we have is the Lunar New Year, so Gong Hei Fa Choi in Cantonese. Tonight is usually a big family gathering at my house with 50 so odd folks, very small, intimate dinners that we have as a family. And since I am missing that event, I really do want to thank Andy for pulling this table together as a very, well, there's no food, but but at least intellectually as satisfying. Especially on such last minute, and for acknowledging that our lives as Asian American Pacific Islander women and girls are really complex and intersected, and that we can get so many different parts of the White House administration to understand choices very, very grateful. So, as you heard, and thank you for calling us a preeminent organization, NAPOP. I'm going to start putting that in my description. NAPOP is the preeminent national only progressive organization for women and girls working on social justice and human rights. We have chapters in 11 cities, and this is a special event because this weekend we pulled together our chapter leaders from those places, including Washington, D.C., New York City, home to the Giants, Bay Area, California, Sacramento, Orange County, Chicago, Arkansas, Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota, Los Angeles, a chapter in Connecticut. But of course, many of us come from homes and families who are our split out our community members. So I really wanted to just lead that off and really, you know, the strength of NAPOF does lie in our chapters and our connections to stories on the ground. Grassroots are the heart and soul of our organization. And I don't want to say too much because we did bring many women with many stories, but we wanted to highlight 3 of our member stories in particular to share with you. I'm hoping that because of time, maybe we can share the stories and then do the dialoguing because many of these issues intersect together. So first up, I want to offer the microphone to Jenny Tan, who's going to talk about healthcare reform and what that meant to us. And then after that, Lynn Chuang is going to talk about our immigration work and immigrant rights needs. And then Diana Mooley is going to end it off with some story about NASDAQ. So Jenny.
Hi, my name is Jenny Tan, and I am a part of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter, home of the Giants. I'm sorry, the Niners. The Giants is right here. I wanted to say thank you to the Obama administration for passing the Affordable Care Act. It really means a lot to us. And I just want to highlight some of the benefits for the API community. For instance, it reduces barriers to preventative care, which is critical because Vietnamese and Lao women, for instance, have the highest rates of cervical cancer and hepatitis B, which are preventable. So this is very, very critical for our community. Another great benefit is the expansion of Medicaid to 4.5 million women, and that is significant. Again, API women are known to have the least, or they are the least uninsured here in our country as well. So again, thank you so much for your time and for giving me this opportunity to share my story and why the ACA Act is critical and so important to me too. So I'll share my story. So I am a proud daughter of immigrant parents who were forced to flee their war-torn country of Vietnam in search for a healthy and better life for themselves and my siblings. Before fleeing Vietnam, my mom had surgery to remove kidney stones, and little did we know that this surgery would change our lives 25 years later. I was a sophomore in high school, and in my 4th period AP English class, the classroom phone rings. My high school teacher answers the call, and as soon as she hangs up, I immediately called to her desk. She tells me that my older brother is here to pick me up early from school. Never have I been summoned to school early. I wait for my brother to arrive at the entrance of my school, and as soon as I sit in the car, my brother tells me that my mom is at the hospital. My heart stops and a million thoughts run through my mind. I asked what happened, and all he said was that she's not well. We arrived to the hospital, and I see my twin brother sitting outside of a hospital room crying, and I knew immediately which room was hers. The shock and vivid memory of seeing my mom connected to machines, tubes inserted into her nostrils, mouth, and veins. Her pale face, her body idle, is one that still causes nightmares and unexpected tears. This invincible supermom met her kryptonite. She quietly asks me in Cantonese, "Why have you not looked at me the entire time?" And I reply, "I cannot because I do not want to cry." To our surprise, we discovered that my mom had only one kidney, and the other was stolen when she had surgery for kidney stones in Vietnam 25 years ago. So for 25 years, her kidney was in overdrive to compensate for the missing one, which led to its deterioration to only function at less than 10% capacity. As a result, her body was slowly poisoning itself and caused myriad of organ damage and other health problems. Unless she has a successful kidney transplant, For the rest of her life, she's dependent on a machine to filter her blood, also known as dialysis. For someone my mom's age, and with no financial leverage, the possibility for a match and kidney transplant is like finding a needle in a large haystack. For the next 9 years, my mom's life consisted of extreme weight loss, incessant fatigue, countless hospitalizations, copious prescription drugs, and many unexpected surgeries. To our surprise, in December 2007, my mom received a successful kidney transplant, and her health is, for the most part, quite stable and consists of daily consumption of 50 pills a day. Growing up on food stamps, government cheese, powdered milk, it was never a conceivable possibility that we could pay for the over $1 million in medical expenses my mom had accrued over the past 14 years. It is because of Medicaid that all of her medical expenses were covered, including her prescription drugs today. It is because of Medicaid my mom was able to see me, the youngest of her 6 children, be the first to graduate from a renowned college. See her eldest daughter, Mary, become a proud grandmother. And for the first time in over 15 years, she is now healthy enough to go back to her homeland and visit our family there this very June. And I'll be able to go with her. So I urge you to please make a commitment today to ensure that the Affordable Care Act is implemented, fully funded, and that Medicaid is protected, as well as women's reproductive health in our lives.
I'm sorry. I'd like to first thank everyone here for giving me this opportunity to be here. My name is Lynn June, and I am a representative from the Paul Hendricks College chapter in Arkansas. I really want to thank the Obama administration for its efforts to move forward on administrative fixes to immigration policies that will allow more families to stay together, especially regarding prosecutorial discretion and the recently proposed family unity waivers. These actions, if fully implemented, have the potential to benefit thousands of families. And I would like to tell you the story of one family that these changes could benefit. Davy is a really young and beautiful and strong 31-year-old Khmer woman. She's a wife and a mother, and just this January, she gave birth to her 5th child. But while she's celebrating all these wonderful changes and carrying hopes for her children, her oldest daughter, who's now 11, was taken from her when she was 2 and put under house arrest as part of the deportation process. And her oldest daughter is now in foster care and has already lost her father because of deportation. And now she doesn't know that her mother is also in the same process. And her mother, who spent her entire life as an American living in the U.S., may be forced to go back to Cambodia. And not only is her oldest daughter in jeopardy of losing a mother who really wants to be reunited with her, but her other 4 children may also lose their mother as well. And when I think about everything that my family went through to support me, and to send me to school, and to make sure that I had everything I needed, and like they could pay me for school or like drive me to places I needed to go, I wonder what type of life prospects that her daughters will have without her mother and without her father. And so it's stories like these that are why NAPOP is going to lead on immigrant rights through the work with the National Coalition on Immigrant Women's Rights, as well as the recent We Belong Together initiative. And like Davy's stories, other immigrant families are clearly affected by deportations. Of the 13.5 million Asian Americans living in the U.S., 2/3 of us are foreign-born, and 1 million API are undocumented. And many API children grow up in households where at least one of their parents is immigrant. The Shattered Family Report, which is in your packet, found that between January and June 2010 alone, 46,000 immigrant parents were detained or deported. As a consequence, there are now over 5,000 children currently in foster care and who are unable to reunite with their families. This holiday season, we collected over 5,000 wishes from children, asking Congress and President Obama to help keep their families together. And in your packets, we've included a few of these stories. And today, I'd like to ask you all, and to ask the Obama administration to continue prioritizing the administrative rules to protect families, especially the implementation of the 2010 prosecutorial discretion memo, and also to work quickly to implement the proposed family unity waivers. And furthermore, I ask you to seek other administrative fixes, like making sure that H-4 visa holders of dependent spouses of certain skilled workers, that they have employment authorization to support their families as well.
My name is Sandy Wood. I'm a member of the Nonprofit DC chapter and also work at the Agency of American Alliance. I want to thank you as well for meeting with us and spending the time. I know your time is limited, but the fact that you're giving your time here means that you recognize the needs of API women. And I also want to recognize all of the sisters in this room here who traveled across the country to be here today. They've been tireless advocates and organizers in the community. Not only that, they've been supporters and loving daughters and their families. And so I want to recognize that I'm sitting here with the privilege of telling my story to you, but I also carry with me the stories of those in this room and those who could be here today. And some of them which are reflected in my story. I came here to DC. I'm originally from Los Angeles, LA, and the weather is vastly different today, and my California skin can't stand it sometimes, but I know I need to be here just as you are here working in the White House and this administration. You know and you recognize that changes need to happen and that people's lives are at stake. And I see that within myself and your eyes, and that you care. And that's why I'm here in DC. And as a slide, that's to I recognize that I was unable to be successful and continue to be successful here in DC because of my education. I went to the University of California, Los Angeles. I have a degree in sociology and Asian American studies. And I spent years trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And it is up until now, in this moment, that I figured out that I took the right path. But after I graduated college, I actually didn't continue on in my professional development. I actually had stopped and decided to work in a nail salon alongside my mother for almost a year. And worked it day in, day out. There was no job that my degree was too good for. I did everything across the gamut. And you name it, I've done it. But I did it because I wanted to understand what my mom went through every day of having to bend over backwards, of having to stand on her feet 13 hours a day, from sunrise to sundown. And I kid you not when I say that. She spent her hours in the nail salon. And as I spent hours with her, I started to understand. And I met people who, clients would come in because they want to feel good about themselves. Hair products and do your nails. I know it's not a joke to have your nails done and did, your mani and pedi. And I also use various products today to make sure that I'm presentable and representing all of myself. So I recognize that, and people feel good about themselves. But I started to see gaps as people feel good about themselves and take care of themselves in the nail salons by getting these services. The workers themselves are putting their health at stake. There are toxins within the nail salon products that they use, and they don't even know. When you have terms like formaldehyde and toluene and diphenylphthalate, they can show my breath when we didn't pronounce these terms. You mentioned it already, Debbie, that a lot of them don't understand languages or limited English proficiency, so they don't know. Not only that, they have other things that are more priority. Their families are being deported. Their children, they need to be able to feed their children and make sure that they get to college because that is their dream for their children. There's so many other priorities at stake, and so they don't think about their own health. And after all, a lot of them are immigrants and also refugees. My mother's a refugee. She risked her life to come to this country. I could never see myself having to make that decision to risk my life in that way. But I think because of that experience of life or near-death experience, everything else seems like a piece of cake. So she, in some sense, feels invincible. So let alone having these toxins within the nail salon products, how could it be affecting her life? And how could it be a slow death, which I think it is. And I see it in your eyes that you feel the same way too. So I just tell you the story, it's because I'm urging you to help us figure out a way to make sure that they are aware of the toxins in the nail salon products. Not only that, there are other products that are being used, and you mentioned earlier that we went together for Brazilian blowout, and already it is defiant. The cosmetic industry is in some ways self-regulated and in some ways corrupted, and continues to be defiant, and not recognizing people using the products deserve and have the right to know what's in these products themselves. So with that being said, I have a few asks that I know that's within your capacity to do, and you do so much already. One of which is I asked the initiative in OSHA to use your leadership on the interagency working group to streamline standards and procedures across the agencies. For example, I ask, will OSHA incorporate the Healthy Green Salon checklist that is being developed by the EPA to provide actions that salons can take to improve the work environment to Susan Hardwood grantee safety and health training programs? I also like to ask the initiative to push the FDA to exercise its full enforcement authority to get the Brazilian blowout product off the market. Finally, I'd like to ask the White House Council on Women and Girls to exercise your leadership to raise awareness of toxins in cosmetic and daily care products. I'd like to know your thoughts on actions that you can take, since this is an issue that affects all men and women, but especially low-income women and women of color.
Thank you all for sharing. It is some of us the most courageous thing we can do for representing us all. So those are just a few of the stories that represent hundreds of thousands of others in the community. And I think there were some questions kind of asked in there, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we can help the families and communities that are
Sure. I think what we'll do is I'll open up the floor to each of my colleagues, one person from each office, to respond to a couple of minutes of their thoughts. I know that we have questions from all of you afterwards, so if I could turn it over to the initiative to
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing, and it's your voices that really advise our work and as leaders in all of the work we do for our advocacy and administration. So thank you so much. I really have to say it's because of NOPOP that the initiative has prioritized nail salon workers and advocating for the rights of nail salon workers at such a high priority level because of all of your leadership and commitment to this and hearing from NOPOP members across the country on how these different regulations and laws are impacting the fight, impacting API nail salon workers. So thank you. I'll definitely take your recommendations into account, and I appreciate you giving them to us. I think the streamlining of standards and procedures, and I think my colleagues at OSHA will really speak to that more about incorporating the EPA training model into their grant, the Susan Retrieval grants. And I think by and large we will take all of this and back to our agency work. So thank you. I also want to mention all the recommendations around incorporation are really well received with us. We're doing everything that we can to work with DHS through Tuet and Alicia on making sure that the administration rules to protect families and prosecution discretion, all of those things are really enforced. And the specific question or recommendation around H-4 visa holders and making sure that those
synergy and the stories because, you know, my mom was struggling with kidney disease now too, and oh gosh, every time I get together with Black Pop and start crying. Like every time. My uncle and my, you know, and we have our share of health affordability issues, and, you know, a lot of my family members have gone through the nail salon circuit too, and so again, I deeply am there with you on all of these things, and I really, really appreciate this work that you're doing to bring awareness to these issues. And, you know, again, you know, I was telling Miriam that those letters are in my queue. They're hanging up on our queue at the White House Initiative. People can see them. And so again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Next time we'll be sure to have more tissue boxes for you.
Yeah.
I came prepared.
I know we're running short of time, so I'm going to give the White House Council Women and Girls 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think in terms of raising awareness, and firstly, it's so wonderful to get to meet everyone, and I hope folks have a minute to hang around afterwards. We can talk further about this because there wasn't time. But I think if OSHA has sort of that know your rights brochure that folks are happy with, I just feel like we should continue the conversation on how we can move that around so that we can really start to raise awareness about that. How do we talk about it in a way that we use OSHA's language, because I don't know what I'm talking about. So really get around the facts to people, but then also working together, because pushing around PDF or getting things out, even in regional offices, isn't going to get into the community. I feel like we all know this. So how do we work together to make sure the larger messaging is going on, but that we're really getting into the community? So I would just say let's continue that conversation, but let's start that conversation and start to raise that awareness, and we'll start doing it. So thank you for bringing it up, and I look forward to working with you.
I'm going to start. I'm just pass this around. We have many ways. Yes, it's all on our website, www.osha.gov. And you can type publications and you'll see it all. You can see it in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Chinese. And we actually have this little card. We just got this checklist on the green substances. I have to tell you, you know, in the hierarchy of public health, you know, when you want companies to protect workers, the last thing you want is for them to wear respirators. You want them to make the workplace safer, like put ventilation systems in or substitution. So that's clearly something that we would promote. Sometimes some of the green products aren't as safe as you think, and like we're putting out a whole fact sheet, which I was saying to you, that we're doing with NIOSH on cleaning compounds, which I know is a big issue also, and recommending some greener products, but making sure people read the labels still on those. So on this this green nail salon checklist, it looks great. We have to look at it because some of it's California OSHA, not federal OSHA, but certainly we can refer to it and we can let people know about it, and you know, people can educate and train about it also, as long as they're clear that some of the requirements are California requirements and not federal requirements. So this is great. And this is good work, and you know, the 4 groups that have the Harvard grants, I mean, there's UC Berkeley, and then there's EPSOS as a grant. Yeah, Minwan has a grant. Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, it also has a grant where they said, and so we'll get you all those, well, you have all the measures from us, so. Yeah, absolutely, and we'll work together. And I think I just sent you all our new website, salons.
I know we started a couple minutes late, so I'd like to just ask that let's wrap about 10 more minutes to open it up to all of you for any questions that you might have for our speakers. Sure, Mary, you have a
No, I'd really like to offer the opportunity for others to speak.
Sure.
Hi, Pam. Good to see you again. I'm Carolyn Pan, Associate Director of Relations with Arizona Alliance and the Women's Chapter. I think all the issues that we brought up seem vital to Asians American. We all work for this, and we're very happy to partner with you guys on New York and also on all of the OSHA summits. It's really if you have any interest in these things in other parts of the country where we can upgrade, right? You know,
just the summits, we're willing to go into the smaller meetings as well in the communities. There have been several that we went to in Chinatown and other parts of our jurisdiction, which is Hawaii, California. We covered Guam, American Samoa. So we're doing smaller meetings there, getting the word out that we're willing to come out.
If there are other thoughts or questions from around the table or around the room? Liz, yeah?
Hi, I was just wondering what type of outreach has been done with HID, like college student age, about their services under the Affordable Care Act. Because as a student myself, I haven't actually heard much, and I wonder what's the dissemination of data that's been going on.
I'll answer that. For me, the first day I came to this office about 3 months ago, my main mission, one of my key priorities was reaching out to the youth community. And that all culminated, well actually it's with the beginning of a conversation starting a week ago when we had our first AAPI youth briefing, where we invited 170 youth leaders from across the country to talk about the issues that were important to them. And a key priority in that conversation was the Affordable Care Act, educating them about how they can stay on their parents' plan. That conversation is not over, it's just beginning. And we are going to stay in touch with them as we move forward and work closely with the White House Council on Women and Girls to continue to push this act forward. We will ensure that we constantly educate them about that and keep them engaged with regular conference calls, with regular meetings. And our fight is just beginning, so keep us accountable with that. Sure.
Don't forget the South.
Sorry. The South.
Don't forget the South.
I grew up in the South.
We're sorry, some of the sisters have flights to catch.
All right.
So a few folks are just leaving, but not too many, and I know we're nearing the end as well.
Okay.
But maybe one more?
Yeah, one more question. Great.
Will the new data collection standard provisions within the Affordable Care Act include collection around race, ethnicity, and gender? And then as a follow-up, we at NOPOP are particularly interested in data collection because it's so key and vital to how then we can really see where the priorities are and the needs, in particular within the subgroups of the API population. So how can the administration help us get the data that would be most useful to our communities?
I don't actually
I feel
answer
like
that
that's-
question, but we can find out and get back to you.
Can you
I
make
think we're
sure-
definitely focused on data, the Women in America report that was put out last March. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you go take a look. It surveyed across the government on issues affecting women, that data that we do have, and it also recognized gaps, whether it was around maternal health and workplace flexibility and work-life balance, and looked at the gaps that there are in data. But I don't know the answer to the question about ACA. We can find out.
Yeah, and just as a note to that, we'll look into the ACA question too, but our initiative has really prioritized data disaggregation as one of our top cost-cutting issues, and we're actually proposing new standards and data disaggregation to incorporate 7 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander ethnicities into the data collection and reporting that the federal government does. So, please.
We urge you to help us cut that by chamber as well, and not just by this.
Well, before I close, I want to thank you all for coming here. I know how busy your schedules are, so the fact that you were able to come here to this White House, we're very honored to welcome you and open these doors up to you all. I also want to recognize in the back, we have our Executive Director of the White House Initiative on AAPI, Kieran Aluja, who's been a fierce advocate for this community, as well as our Deputy Director, Christina Lacameo. I also want to recognize my intern, who is in the back as well. She just left, but she's been the one that helped make this event possible. That's Krishna Patel. She's a fierce sister as well, and I really am so proud of what she's been doing. Just to close, I think this discussion for us is very important because it puts a face, it puts a story, it puts emotions to the work that we're doing every single day. And when we walk through these halls of this White House and throughout this administration, this conversation is going to be a reminder to us of why we wake up every day and do the work that we do. And I can guarantee you that we will continue this conversation, we will continue this fight in all the work that we do. And that my challenge to all of you is to keep us accountable, to keep us pushing forward. I know that NAPCOF is a very important organization that that always has an open, direct line to me. And so if any chance that you have any questions or any concerns, I would make it a big priority for me to respond to reporting those. With that, I encourage you to go back to your communities, to share these stories, but also to just be a partner for the White House. This president and this administration is a partner to you. You are essentially Barack Obama in your own community. So we challenge you to go back and be that fire, be that light, and be that message for all of us. So thank you all for being here.